Welcome! Today, we're diving into the autobiography of Sun Myung Moon to really understand the blueprint for his global movement. I mean, how does any organization go from a single, war-torn country to having a worldwide presence? Well, according to this account, the answer really boils down to two key things: immense personal sacrifice and a very unique vision for business.
You know, this one quote really sets the entire stage for us. Just picture it. We're in post-war Korea, where just surviving day-to-day is a huge struggle. But right in the middle of all that, Moon says he was focused on something else entirely, a long-term global plan. And it's that tension, right? The tension between just trying to stay alive and this huge future vision. That's what drives this whole story.
So where does this kind of planning even begin? The source tells us that right after he got out of prison, Moon headed to a mountain temple. But he wasn't just there to recover. He was there to think, to pray, and to really lay the groundwork for his church's future on a global scale.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What was the first target for this new global mission? Japan. At the time, Korea and Japan were officially enemy nations. I mean, no diplomatic ties whatsoever. The wounds from colonial rule were still incredibly raw. So to even think about sending a missionary there, that was a totally radical idea.
And that brings us to the first major move in this global plan: a mission to an enemy. It's a move that seems politically impossible and, frankly, personally dangerous, which is exactly why the story of how it all went down is just so remarkable.
This is the command Moon gives to his chosen missionary, a man named Bong Choon Choi, back in 1958. Just listen to those words. It's not a suggestion, right? It's an absolute order with zero room for failure. Go, and don't you dare come back until the job is done. There's such an incredible intensity in that directive.
So you have to understand the sheer scale of the sacrifice here. To fund this one single mission, the church took out a massive loan, at a time when its own members were struggling just to find food. This wasn't just a priority, it was the priority, even above basic survival. And for the missionary himself, it meant illegally entering a hostile country, risking his life from the very first moment.
And this timeline, wow, it just lays out the whole ordeal. The mission nearly ends before it even starts. He's arrested immediately. To keep from being deported, Choi starts a life-threatening fast. That lands him in the hospital, which he then has to escape from. It took a full year and a half of constant crisis before he could even start the actual work he was sent there to do.
Now, to really put that Japan mission into perspective, just look at the mission to the United States only a year later. The difference is just staggering, isn't it? One was an illegal entry into an enemy nation filled with risk. The other involved official visas and even government aid. This comparison really highlights just how unbelievably extreme and dangerous that first pioneering mission was.
Okay, so missions like the one to Japan were incredibly costly, both for the people involved and financially. And this raises a pretty critical question. How do you fund a global ambition on that kind of scale? I mean, taking out massive loans just isn't sustainable. And this is where that second key pillar of the blueprint comes in: enterprise.
Moon's autobiography talks about this specific business philosophy he called sacred enterprise. The basic idea is that business isn't just about making money for yourself, it's a sacred activity meant to support God's work. But it came with some really strict rules. You had to be honest, you could never take more than 30% profit, and every single penny had to be spent prayerfully with a clear purpose.
So how did this philosophy actually work in practice? Well, the first ventures were incredibly humble. In fact, they started with something as small and seemingly worthless as used postage stamps.
Okay, you gotta hear this, because this model is fascinatingly clever. Members were asked to use a bunch of small 1-1 stamps on their letters instead of just one big 41-1. Then, the church would collect all those used canceled stamps from the envelopes. I mean, to anyone else, that's just trash, right? But they figured out a way to sell them and actually generate real income.
And the results were pretty astonishing. In its first year, this simple little stamp collecting business brought in 1 million won. It's such a powerful example of how a small, creative idea, when everyone does it together, can generate some serious cash for the mission.
But, of course, as the global work started to expand, collecting stamps and coloring photos by hand just wasn't going to cut it anymore. The enterprise had to scale up. It needed to move from these small crafts into real industry. And this was the beginning of that. In 1962, Tongil Industries was founded with just one machine, a single, old, used lathe that had been left behind by the Japanese after the war. They installed it in a little coal storage room. You really couldn't have a more humble start for an industrial company. And yet, standing there in front of that one old rusty machine, Moon declared this incredible vision. He didn't just see a lathe. He saw 70,000 lathes. He saw the very foundation of Korea's future defense and car industries. There it is again, right? That stark contrast between a super humble reality and this absolutely colossal vision.
All right, so the final venture we see in this account takes the enterprise in a totally new direction. We're moving from the land to the sea.
So just a year after buying that lathe, the church launched a fishing boat. And its name? Cheon Song-ho, which means victory of heaven, kind of signals that this was meant to be more than just your average commercial fishing operation.
And here's where we get the deeper reasoning behind it all. For Moon, the ocean was deeply symbolic. He saw it as the source of all life. He believed it was a place of trial, where overcoming challenges at sea would forge your character and prepare you for challenges on land. And he felt that the world was moving into a new oceanic era. So for him, the fishing business was both a practical enterprise and a spiritual training ground, all based on this bigger sense that the whole world's future was tied to the sea.
So what is the blueprint we've really uncovered in this account? At the end of the day, it seems to be this unique formula. You start with a vision so massive it seems downright impossible. You fuel it with personal sacrifices that push the absolute limits of human survival. And then you fund it all with this unique blend of sacred philosophy and really practical business. And it leaves us with one final thought. How powerful is that fusion of immense risk, deep faith, and smart enterprise when it comes to building a global movement?